Hi, good evening. I have to call the Anaheim Public Utility Board meeting to order. Start out the meeting with our verbal roll call.
Vice Chair Seymour,
Here.
Board Member Abdul Rahman,
Here.
Board Member Haraldi,
Here.
Board Member Bala,
Here.
Board Member Guyona, Board Member Guyona,
Here.
Board Member Showalter,
Here.
Chair Madrano.
Present.
Let the record show that all members are present.
Next item will be public comments. The public was given the opportunity to submit public comments electronically. For the record, we have received no public comments. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the August 26th meeting.
I have read those minutes and make a motion to approve them.
Motion made by Vice Chair Seymour. I get a second?
I second it.
Second by Member Bala. We get a roll call vote.
This is a roll call vote for item number 1. Vice Chair Seymour,
Aye.
Board Member Abdul Rahman,
Aye.
Board Member Baroldi,
Aye.
Board Member Bala,
Aye.
Board Member Guyona,
Aye.
Board Member Showalter,
Aye.
Chair Madrano.
Aye.
The vote is 7 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries.
All right, thank you. The next item on the agenda is a presentation on revenue protection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to have Janet introduce her speaker, but revenue protection deals with helping to protect our assets, meters and theft of power or water. And so I'll have Janet go into a little bit more. Janet?
Yes, thank you, Dooku. Can you all hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, great. So as Dooku said, this revenue protection unit in the department is called on to investigate when anomalies occur in either billing or usage for both electric and water divisions. They come across very interesting situations that arise in the field, and so we want to share with the board what that unit does on a daily basis. So I'd like to introduce our acting electric superintendent, Chris Dalton, who oversees the revenue protection unit, as well as all metering and field services, as well as our electrical inspection group. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Good evening, and thank you to the board chair and board members for having me here this evening. As Janet mentioned, my name is Chris Dalton, and one of the programs that I oversee is our revenue protection program. Tonight, I'd like to highlight some of the aspects of our revenue protection program and explain and showcase a little of what our group does for the department, our customers, and the city. Go ahead, Peggy. There you go. Not everyone knows exactly what revenue protection is, so let me start here. In short, like Janet said, revenue protection is the utilities loss prevention department. We currently employ 2 full-time revenue protection coordinators to investigate and recover any potential revenue losses that may occur with either the water or electricity that we serve our customers. We want to make sure that any water or electricity that is delivered to a customer returns to the department in the form of properly metered and billed revenue. We do this through the investigation of potential theft, testing of equipment that may be failing, and energy and water usage reviews. On this slide, I want to remind the board real quick that you can zoom in if you need to. So if you're having difficulty seeing some of that text, you can zoom in. We're often asked how we find diversions, and I assure you that we don't just randomly go looking for the needle in the haystack. As you can see from the graph on the left, our investigation leads come from sources within our own department, with the remaining 15% coming from various other entities. Once we receive a lead, we follow a very structured approach each time to work through the investigation process from start to finish. Understand that not all potential losses are diversions, and not even all diversions are the result of a customer's willful act to defraud the utility. So, with every contact, our revenue protection coordinators approach our customers with courtesy and respect. They typically identify themselves before entering a yard and explain to our customers why we see a need for the department to be looking into something on their property. Our activity report here immediately shows why we have this program and its benefits, not only to our department, but how we also assist other city departments as well. As you can see, in the last fiscal year, we completed over 5,000 field investigations. We see that there is great comfort in knowing that the overwhelming majority of our customers are honest and not thieves, as very little of those inspections resulted in found diversions. Additionally, we see that most of our recovered revenue results from failing equipment, which we refer to as stuck meters. These can be either water or electric meters and often result from the aging life of the device. We anticipate that the ongoing AMI deployment will dramatically reduce these occurrences, as the AMI meter is more of a miniature computer than a mechanical device with rotating parts. Outside of revenue protection, our electric meter shop tests the meters of our larger commercial customers for accuracy as part of an ongoing maintenance program, which also helps to reduce and eliminate potential revenue losses. Perhaps what is most telling in these stats is that revenue protection recovers nearly $2 million per year, which in turn saves this cost from being passed to our ratepayers. I'd like to now show you some of the different things that we see out in the field with some of our not so honest clientele. The first picture on the left shows what we call jumpers. Jumpers can be used legally and temporarily by utility personnel to keep a customer in service while they perform maintenance like meter testing, replacement, or repair. When used illegally, like in this picture, they provide the customer with full service without any or a small portion of the electricity traveling through the meter and subsequently not being billed. In this second picture, we see what is referred to as a pinned meter. In this instance, the customer has drilled a small hole in the top of the meter glass and inserted what appears to be a straightened out paper clip or small gauge wire into the glass so that it made contact with the disc and prevented it from spinning. Because the disc could not rotate, the dials on the face of the meter could not advance. The customer continues to enjoy full service, but we cannot see how much electricity we are actually supplying them. These pins are easily inserted and removed to eliminate suspicion. It's worth noting that the AMI deployment will fully eliminate these types of diversions. The third picture on the right shows perhaps our most common type of residential electrical diversion. In this diversion, we see two red wires secured to the top of the meter socket. Most of the electricity that this customer receives is perfectly legitimate, having traveled through the meter, being metered, and billed appropriately. But in this instance, all electricity that is received through these two red wires is unmetered and thus thieved from the utility. As the caption shows, we see this often with air conditioning units, and with the recent 110-degree weather heat wave that we just had, it's easily explainable why a customer might be motivated to do this. Water thefts are not as common as electrical thefts, but when we do see them, here are a couple of examples of what we see. The first picture on the left shows a customer's water meter vault in which the meter has been completely removed and replaced by a small section of PVC pipe that we refer to as a spacer. This spacer provides the customer with full water service without any of it being metered or billed. This customer simply forgot to reinstall his meter before the next time that our meter reader came around and was subsequently caught. The second picture shows how the customer tampered with the meter without fully removing it. Rather, the customer removed the register on top of the brass base, placed a quarter on top of the base, and then reinstalled the register on the base. Under normal operation, when water flows through the meter, a wheel spins. That wheel is connected to a magnet within the base, which then connects to a magnet within the top register. The spinning magnets then advance the dials of the register. The inserted quarter in this case, however, prevented the two magnets from connecting and thus prevented the dials from advancing when the customer was using water. The last picture on the right shows a hydrant meter after we found those hoses connected directly to the hydrant. This is a picture from Angel Stadium at a previous monster truck event. Prior to those red meters being installed, those hoses were attached directly to the hydrant, and the utility was unable to meter and bill the event operator for their usage. If you've ever been to that event and you've seen the courses that they build, you can imagine how much water might be required to construct and maintain those tracks. Now I'd like to move into some of our more unique investigations, some that show just how hidden diversions can be. These next two slides have a number of picture transitions in them, so I'd like to remind the board that viewing this is best experienced by following along online as opposed to following your paper handouts. Here's a single family home in the very neighborhood that I myself grew up in. A childhood friend of mine actually lived next door. As you can see from the photo, it looks like any normal home. Even the electrical panel looks normal from the outside. It's a standard 200 amp panel, utility side on the left with a customer's side on the right, which contains their breakers and branch circuit wiring. But when we remove the meter and panel covers, we immediately begin to see issues. The utility side of the panel shows wiring or conductors entering at the top and bottom of the panel. We should see one or the other depending on whether this is an underground or overhead fed service, but never both. Upon looking closer, we see that the wires at the bottom are tapped into the utility's overhead service wires that bring power to the home. This is shown in that circle in the picture. These wires supply unmetered service to a sub-panel located within the home, which then supplies power to a network of high-powered lights and ventilation equipment used to grow and cultivate large quantities of marijuana plants. Given the load that we measured on the wiring, it is suspected that the house was not lived in at all, and that the entire house had been converted into various grow rooms. Our revenue protection coordinators were able to estimate and subsequently back bill usage of nearly $23,000 worth of electricity over the time period when this operation was believed to have existed. Naturally, when confronted with the bill, our customer gave this response. To which we said, "That's okay, we'll accept payments." This customer is no longer there, but to date, they've been able to pay back a little over half and continue to make monthly payments on the balance. Here's another seemingly normal building. Standard commercial building located directly across from the Kaiser Permanente facility on La Palma. Inside, it features a nice, large sitting area with open space, might even comply with some social distancing restrictions today. But really, these are just part of the larger operation that is displaying and selling marijuana for medical or recreational use, something specifically prohibited by code here in Anaheim. Now, before we move on, notice how the lights are on in the upper right picture. Moving on, we see that the electrical panel looks pretty normal. The red tag, though, hanging from the meter indicates that the power has been shut off by our personnel. This padlock and red tag again show exactly how we terminated this service, which takes us back to that previous slide and begs the question, well then, how are the lights on? The answer is because of an installed bypass. Inside this panel, we find bypass wires that were installed after we locked off that main breaker. These wires, the smaller gauge ones, are installed directly to wiring coming from our transformer. They then supply full unmetered power to this commercial building. Besides the theft issue, further inside this building, we find a number of safety issues, including these two open sub-panels with exposed and energized wiring. And this gas-powered generator, which has been operating within a fully enclosed structure, a fire code violation due to the carbon monoxide emissions. Our back bill here was almost $4,000, and this one has been paid in full. You saw in a previous slide how revenue protection helped recover some revenue for our building department by reporting unpermitted electrical panels. Beside that, a number of years ago, we began helping with the Code Enforcement Department's efforts to eliminate illegal businesses operating within the city. This slide shows the 87 disconnect requests that Revenue Protection has completed in just the last 4 years. We see that these efforts have pretty much eliminated illegal massage parlors and gambling halls, also known as internet cafes. Additionally, there's been a reduction in the number of MMDs, or marijuana dispensaries, since a height in 2018. If you've watched the news recently, you may have seen how LEDWP will terminate power to COVID party houses. Well, I'd like to think that they may have gotten that idea from their smaller neighbor to the south, because all 4 short-term rentals that we've disconnected this year, 2 of them just a couple weeks ago, have been COVID party houses. One of them was even the site where a party goer's cell phone video shows errant gunfire to have occurred. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and open it up to any questions that the board may have.
It's amazing how creative some people get.
Right.
Wow. Any questions for the board?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So, 2 things. One, on your first slide, you had 10% of this kind of theft attributed to operations and meter shop. Well, I'm not clear as to what that means.
So when operations goes out to a customer because any kind of call that they may have to respond to a customer for partial power, for lights not on, service not on, whatever, or our meter shop as well, every now and then they may find something that they may find a diversion. Recently, in part of our AMI deployment, our meter shop went out, removed the old meter, the old non-AMI meter, went to install the new AMI meter, and noticed that inside the panel there were some suspect wires that were part of a diversion. So when any other section of the utility finds something that might be suspect or something that actually is a diversion, they'll contact Revenue Protection. We had one just yesterday that was an AC that the guy had run conduit spliced into the overhead service wires at the weatherhead, and had his own little breaker box for just his AC, and that was caught by our meter shop, or first observed, if you will, by our meter shop.
So for example, in our operations, we have troubleshooters. They're our first responders. And a lot of times we get a call into our dispatch that says, I don't have power, or I have partial power, something like that. The troubleshooter will go out and identify what the issue is. So that's one source, operations, in order to find what the issue is.
The second question I have is that I would assume that these panels, which have the main line come in and has metering, are they not sealed? Do people have access to it, to jump it, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, there's the utility side has to be properly sealed, and on the meter itself, there's a ring, and then there's a seal that you're not supposed to tamper and cut. And so when a meter reader or somebody spots what's going on out there, they see that a ring cut or damaged and such, like, then chances are there's tampering going on. We feel like with the new advanced meters that are coming out, because they're electronic, they have more digital sensors in them that will give some indication that there's tampering coming on. So then we'll get a notice, and then we can send somebody out, because eventually we're going to be doing away with actual meter readers going to people's houses over time.
So the panel, so nobody can access it without tampering with the seal, is what I hear.
Yes.
Yes,
Any other
for the most part, we do have some where if you have an overhead service or even an underground service, they'll cut into the wall of the home and cut into that mast and splice directly in there. And those are the most difficult to catch. We usually catch those through usage reviews that, spike or swell or whatever. But I mean, you can, it's rare. They're not, it's a lot harder, but you can get in and divert without breaking that seal.
There are a number of cases too where we're collaborating with the building department, with code enforcement, and so they assist us as well in having eyes in the field and they contact Chris if they see something that looks unusual. So they as well are aware of some of these tactics that are used.
Okay, I have a question. Beside fine, is there any legal or criminal charges for people tampering the
There
meter?
can be. There can be. It is a misdemeanor by the California Penal Code. It is a specific intent crime, which means that as an investigator, if I'm going to refer this to the city attorney's office for potential prosecution, not only do I have to prove that the diversion existed or that the crime existed, I have to also prove that you as the defendant or the suspect in the case willfully intended to do what you were doing. So if let's say you moved into a house where the previous owners did the bypass, I have to prove not only that that bypass exists, but that you put it there and that you intended to put it there and that you knew what you were doing when you put it there. But yes, we do prosecute quite often. It is a misdemeanor. It holds up to $1,000 fine and can even be a year in prison, which we have seen.
Are there any other questions?
Also, that applies to the commercial building, like big lot commercial building too.
It would apply to anyone that has done the deed, so to speak.
All right, thank you.
Walter has a question.
Member
Yes,
Showalter?
yes, I have a question. I hope we're not turning off people's power because someone had a baby shower or birthday party at their house. Chris, please tell me that's not true.
That is, we do not believe that to be the case. We have established protocol with our code enforcement department, and they run through an entire due process before they ever even request a disconnect from us. These are your Airbnbs, your VRBOs that are not permitted with the city, that are operating outside of the
Got it.
permissible rights
Okay.
of the city.
Okay.
So with the bars and all those kind of places closed, a lot of these COVID party houses have popped up through VRBO and Airbnb as an alternative to your Thursday night kind of thing. And
Okay, got
that's
it.
what these are. They're not baby showers and that kind of stuff. No.
Okay. Well, I think the LA Department of Water and Power was threatening even that. So I was just hoping we weren't going there.
We are not going there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I had a quick question. At the beginning of your discussion, you had indicated that when you're entering, you typically identify yourself. Are there times when you don't identify yourself or employees do not identify themselves as public utilities or from the city?
Yes. So if let's say like you saw the picture with the pinned meter, if we know, like if there's a pin in your meter, so there's a pin in your meter, you put a pin in your meter, that is typically going to get reported to our group from our meter reading section. Maybe you forgot to take the pin out of your meter, kind of like the guy that forgot to put his water meter back in. So if we suspect that there's going to be some willful intent, and a pinned meter would be a willful intent, we're going to go there, we're going to try to catch you in the act. And that may be an instance where we're not necessarily identifying ourselves before we enter a property. Those are rare.
Very rare.
I'll comment on that. This is John Seymour. I had a problem with my meter, and a fellow came out who was one of your people. He never identified himself 2 times. So it happens more than rare. I would suggest that you, again, train your people that given a normal situation, they should identify themselves and who they are.
I think we'll
Yes.
take that back and definitely make sure that our folks are trained. There's only 2 of them that do. And so.
I mean, I called Janice to find out if this guy was casing my house.
Right.
Not only from a safety perspective, I mean, in today's world, that can be, a dangerous situation. It just one instance where, you don't identify yourself to the wrong person and it ends in tragedy. So just be careful with that, in my opinion.
I agree.
No offense, but a little bit of power is not worth an incident.
And we definitely train our employees, not only in revenue protection, but in all our metering services or any of our divisions and units that approach private property. We understand the sensitivity, especially in these times, of our customers and their safety as well as ours. And so we do make every effort to ensure that they know who we are. We have identification on the trucks and on our uniforms as well, and they have their business cards with them. But as Chris stated, in some rare cases where they are doing a follow-up investigation, most likely in conjunction with code enforcement, there are times where they have not identified themselves. So that does happen.
And I think, Janet, the point here was, in this particular case with Mr. Seymour, that didn't happen. And so
Exactly.
that needs to be taken back and looked at more carefully and reviewed with our revenue protection team to identify what happened there. And then maybe we can report back afterwards.
Sure.
All right.
I will, on the positive side, I'll tell you, we had a problem with our meter here at my office in Anaheim, and they were very, they came in and they identified themselves, John, here. And they were very professional. It was just a stuck meter. So you do have the good with the bad.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the board? Thank you. Next item on the agenda, we have a presentation on power supply portfolio mix. If I can see Mr. Graham.
Yes, Graham, let's see this one out. Graham?
Thank you, everyone there. Just to tee this up, every year the electric utilities are required to disclose to customers the information about various types of power that they consume on an annual basis. So to that end, what we do is produce something called a power content label, which is designed specifically to identify the different sources of power used in the business or in the home in Anaheim. When you think of a power content label, perhaps the analogy that we use a lot, and you'll see quite often, is the analogy to that of akin of a nutrition label on a grocery store or food item, where the power content label is exactly that same thing. It tells you exactly the types of power that's being used in your home. So whether that be renewable power, whether that be coal, whether that be natural gas. With that, I'd like to introduce Jamie Stamler. Jamie is one of our integrated resources planners, and he's been with the integrated resources group just over a couple of years now. And one of his responsibilities is to develop the power content label that APU uses to provide to our customers. So tonight, Jamie will be providing you an update on the power content label for 2019, and also highlighting some of the changes that have occurred in the calculation of the various percentages used in our power resources since the previous power content label was produced last year. With that, Jamie?
Thank you, Graham, for the introduction. Good evening to the Public Utility Board members and the public. Thank you for this opportunity. As Graham said, I will be presenting on Anaheim Public Utilities Power Supply Portfolio Mix. So moving to slide 2, as the board may recall, the state's signature legislation was approved in 2018. SB 100 established statewide mandates for 100% carbon-free resources by 2045, and we're still working through what that means. For example, Bowerman landfill counts as renewable today, and while it reduces emissions significantly from flaring methane, it still produces carbon. Coming out of the rotating outages in August, there are questions about the state's renewable energy initiatives. However, the governor and state regulators have clearly stated that renewable energy was not the sole cause of the issues that are now under investigation. With all of this as the backdrop, Anaheim is navigating through legislative and regulatory policies while still delivering reliable, affordable power to our customers. As a reminder, we had sufficient resources to cover Anaheim's load during the rotating outages. However, we were required to drop load to avoid large-scale and prolonged blackouts. Moving to slide 3, This chart has been previously shared with the board, and it reflects Anaheim's pathway to meeting another bill, AB 32, which established a statewide goal of 40% below 1990 greenhouse gas emissions levels by 2030. With the divestiture of San Juan in 2018 and the planned exit from Intermountain Power Plant in 2027, when our contractual obligation terminates, we will be fully out of coal. One question that has come up is if coal may resurface given the reliability issues experienced in California. Since existing legislation prohibits continued investments to extend the life of coal, we don't believe that will be the case, at least in California. Moving to slide 4. Here you can see the progression of increasing renewables to meet state mandates and the reduction of coal through full divestiture. Renewables were not as readily available and were generally higher in cost in 2010. So we had limited investments amounting to 11%, which increased to 26% in 2020 and will make up the largest portion of our portfolio in 2030 at 60%, which includes energy storage. Coal is going in the opposite direction, and you can see the declining percentages from 61% to 37% to 0% in 2030, following our exit from IPP in 2027. Going to slide 5. So how do we convey our power resource mix to our customers? In addition to outreach, education, and preparation of plans like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Plan and the Integrated Resource Plan, we are required by AB 162 and SB 1305 to disclose information to California consumers about the energy resources used to generate their electricity with a power content label. One way to think about the power content label is as a nutrition label for electricity. It reflects the resource mix used to serve customers. In prior years, the calculation method generally tracked with the resource mix. Here is the 2010 power content label, and the 61% coal and 11% renewables are consistent with the prior pie chart. Going to slide 6, in December 2019, the California Energy Commission modified how all utilities calculate their power content label. The new calculation indicates Anaheim Public Utilities' coal percentage increase beginning on the 2019 label. The utility's overall portfolio has not increased its usage of coal. It is simply a result of the newly implemented calculation. Moving to slide 7. In conclusion, Anaheim has made great progress on making our energy portfolio cleaner. From 2010 to 2030, we expect to increase renewable usage from 11% to 60%, while decreasing coal usage from 61% down to 0. Consequently, our GHG emissions are expected to drop to approximately 70% below 1990 emission levels by 2030. Our PCL will show an increase in coal over the next few years caused by a regulatory change strictly related to calculation methodology, not an actual expansion in coal use. Preparing for the future, we anticipate making further investments in renewables and energy storage to ensure reliable, affordable, and sustainable resources for Anaheim customers. With that, that concludes the presentation. Does the board have any questions?
So before we go to questions, I just want to comment. This is the beauty of Sacramento, I guess I would say, is we had a process that worked. We were calculating based on a methodology that pretty much tracked with what you saw in the 2010 power content label. The 2019 calculation changed that, and we petitioned and said, this doesn't make sense. It's not tracking. And they recognized that. However, they're not going to change the calculation method going back. So again, this is the beauty of Sacramento. Sometimes there's so many layers upon layers of regulatory, legislative, all sorts of different bureaucracy that this is what we end up with. So what are we going to do to not confuse our customers? We do have to, by those legislations that Jamie talked about, we have to post this power content label. But we'll do the best we can to show that we are progressing towards the reduced coal and other fossil fuel mix, so that if anybody has questions, they can always give us a call. We're happy to explain it. We have our greenhouse gas plan that people can see if they want to see the overall plan of what we're trying to do. So we'll do our best to explain it, but that's why we wanted to share this with the board, because you may get a question, it's like, I thought Anaheim was getting out of coal. How come your coal percentage looks like it's going up? It's not. It's just a calculation methodology.
Any questions?
That's a good answer.
Do we have any questions for members of the board? Vice Chair Seymour?
Yes, between now and 2030, have we forecast a price per megawatt overall from now to 2030 so that we have an idea of what our cost is going to increase or stay flat? I know it's not going to decrease.
Yeah, so we're working on that right now. And we do modeling all the time to try to figure out both load, how much energy we're going to need to cover to meet our customers' needs, as well as what are we tracking in terms of pricing of resources. And then also you got to consider pricing of distribution and everything else that gets factored into it. So it's a fairly complex model that gets annually run so that we can kind of see where we're going. What we're seeing generally is what we shared in our integrated resource plan, which is generally loads are pretty much flat, maybe even ticking down just slightly. Yes, we'll have heat waves, but generally overall, the reason why it's going flat or slightly down is because of distributed generation, solar, and then energy efficiency, right? So building standards and people getting more improvements, LED bulbs, et cetera. And so the combination, meaning it's flat. So what about our cost side? What does that look like? Well, one thing we can be sure is ever since these rotating outages, there's going to be a big push for enhanced reliability. And what that's going to mean is additional capacity, additional resource adequacy, additional something to make sure it doesn't happen again, because the governor made clear he does not want to see rotating outages again. So that side is going to cost something. So we're going to be rolling all of those factors into the model, trying to see, but the rules aren't out yet. So it's a little hard to tell today, but no matter what, there are going to be cost increases associated with enhanced reliability, in addition to all the distribution that needs to get replaced over time. And that's something that Janet's going to touch on a little bit, is we had a heat storm, where we had a series of outages, as Ravneesh knows very well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about distribution and how we're trying to manage those replacements as well.
I would find it useful to get an idea of what we expect over the years.
Yeah.
You know, are we going to go up 25%, going to go up 100%,
So I'd say
70%?
we can give you some ballparks. The issue is I can't tell you what's going to be regulated. And so whatever ballpark I give you today, there's very good likelihood it's going to change tomorrow, because there's going to be a new regulation, a new legislative package or something else that says in order to meet these reliability goals, you can't just serve your customers, you have to buy additional. So we're already there. Now they're going to say, now you need to do something on top of that to make sure, to double make sure that you're not going to have these rotating outages. So those are the variables, and that's why we constantly run these models.
Right.
But we can give you an idea or a snapshot of what we think it'll be with those caveats. I hope you can appreciate that we don't have the crystal ball for what's in this governor's, the next governor's, and everybody else's in between now and 2030.
Yeah, it's a forecast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have a quick question. So how does the customer get to see this label? Is it going to be on the bill or?
We have a bill insert.
Mhm.
And so we still have more than half of our customers still want a paper bill, so it'll be there. For our online customers, it'll be a link. People can click on the bill insert and it'll be included there.
And
Any other questions?
just to touch on that really quickly, we expect normally this power content label normally goes out about now. With COVID-19 and the pandemic, I think right now that's obviously been delayed. We're looking towards the end of the year at this point in time. So as we get more information, we'll make a determination as to when to send that out, but we haven't been given direction. We haven't gotten everything we need from the CEC in order to actually produce the power content label to send out to customers as yet.
Okay, any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next item, we have the presentation on the emergency response planning.
Okay, I think Janice, you're going to introduce your speaker on this one.
Thank you, Jiku. I'd like to introduce Dennis Schmidt. He's the department's NERC Compliance and Emergency Response Planning Manager. Dennis has been with the utility for a number of years and has a strong working knowledge of all utility operations. The activation of the EOC in March this year related to COVID really brought us a new view of emergency response planning. The effort was not related to a physical event like a fire or earthquake. So our pandemic plans had to be dusted off and revised, as well as new resources created to support those emergency operation center tasks. Dennis will provide an update on the department's emergency response activities for the past year, which have been very exciting. Dennis?
Okay, well, let me begin by just thanking everybody for their interest in this topic and for the opportunity to talk to the board about our emergency planning program and some of the activities that we've been involved with. It would be, I guess, incumbent upon me to make sure that everybody here understands that our program is really very comprehensive, covers a lot of moving parts, but more importantly, it is a proactive and responsive program. My goal today is really just to provide you an overview of the plan, to talk a little bit about our priorities, discuss some of the elements of our emergency planning program, and then to touch on some of the significant events that you folks probably have heard about already. So if we can go to slide 2. The key priorities of the emergency planning program are really in 3 areas. The first is to ensure that staff are prepared to respond and to recover from unplanned events. We're not talking about the normal outages that occur when a transformer fails or something like that. We're talking about the really big ones that involve, hundreds, if not thousands of people, and perhaps may extend over a long period of time. So part of doing that is to make sure that everybody understands their role and their responsibilities, that they know what to do when something big happens. This includes a notification, making sure that people understand, what their first moves are going to be in the early hours of an event. Another area that's important is the coordination with other agencies. Certainly, we are part of the city and we operate within the incident command system. We have a desk at the city EOC, which we staff with utility employees to help coordinate with the police, fire, public works, and other departments. And this coordination helps us encourage a more timely response and certainly makes the communication between departments more effective. Along those lines, we also participate in emergency planning meetings throughout the year that include other agencies such as the Metropolitan Water District, Orange County Water District, the Police and Fire Department, the Orange County Operational Area, which is managed by the Sheriff's Department, and so on. That coordination is vital to make sure that we're prepared and have the points of contact at our disposal should a major event occur. I've learned through the years that knowing who's on the other side of the phone when you call for help is important. And that leads me into our third area of effort. This is about mutual assistance programs. As we know, when we have a major catastrophic event, it's probably going to overwhelm the crews and staff that we have here in Anaheim. Through our cooperation with other agencies, the American Public Power Association, the Southern California Public Power Authority, CUEA, which is a California Utilities Emergency Association, and then the water agencies, MODOC and WEROC. We spend a lot of time making sure that we have the correct equipment typing, make sure that we have plans in place so that if and when we ask for help, we can do so in a most efficient way. And ultimately, it's my area of responsibility to make sure that the agreements, the contractual agreements are in place so that we can get reimbursement should we provide service to others. Next slide, please. Okay, so digging deeper into the program, you need to know that we have written plans that help guide our employees. The first is what we call the emergency response plan. It's the typical binder that every large agency has that describes their organization and how they'll get things done. But more important and probably unique to Anaheim is that we have both a comprehensive, we call it the main body, that provides general direction to our different divisions, that each division also incorporates their own emergency response plan within the larger department plan. And what does this emergency response plan do? It provides specific direction and guidance regarding activation, notification sequences, timing for notifications, setting priorities for our response, and as I said a few minutes ago, the coordination of resources for our mutual assistance. One other plan that's worth mentioning here is the Walnut Canyon Emergency Action Plan. As everybody knows, the Walnut Canyon is probably our most visible public utilities structure. And of course, the planning for a potential or catastrophic event there is important. We have coordinated with the fire department, police department, and strangely enough, other departments, other agencies, including CHP, Caltrans, and others. And then a couple other areas I'll just touch on briefly. Each of our facilities has its own emergency action plan. So our major facilities like the Linane Filtration Plant or the Canyon Power Plant each have their own plans that we use to keep employees informed about what they should do in the event of a localized emergency. For example, a fire or an evacuation that's necessary for, let's say, a chemical spill or a security issue. And then finally, I touch on that we, as part of the city, we provide our input to the citywide plans. And the one that's of particular interest is what they call the Continuity of Operations Plan, which is the COOP is its kind of its acronym. This here is simply our section of a larger city plan that ensures that our vital business processes continue during an event or that we can restore and recover quickly to normal. Next slide, please. Going over the significant events in 2020, obviously the COVID-19 response and the coronavirus outbreak is number one in terms of things that have captured our attention. And I must say that this is unprecedented in terms of what we call never seen and never expected challenges. What's interesting, I guess, from an emergency planning perspective, is it's resulted in the longest activation of the city EOC. And more importantly, the utilities department, while we didn't have a primary role, our role was to provide support in other ways. One, as you've probably heard already, is about moratoriums on utility shutoffs and also providing support for those that are doing the housing projects and public works and community services. Along those lines, we had to be very flexible. And I like to coin the phrase, business from a distance. And much of our staff had to do things differently. The creative problem solving that they demonstrated and the leadership given by the chain of command allowed us to complete our vital operations without significant delay. Next slide, please. As part of our annual report, we come to the board to inform you about any major events that took place, many major outages. And just for your information, what we're talking about again are those very large and prolonged events that affect large numbers of people. For example, a major event on the electric system would involve 10,000 electric customers or more and 500 or more water customers. I'm happy to report that we don't have any of those in 2020, and we haven't had any of those for several years. The next area, of course, is what just happened. Is on August 14th, there was a statewide stage 3 emergency that required us to do some load shedding. I think that's been discussed or will be discussed in the near future. But more importantly, from an emergency planning standpoint, this was the first time in, I know, 30 years that we've had mutual assistance crews from another agency actually deploy to Anaheim to assist us with replacement of some overhead transformers. Again, it's a major event where the circumstances overwhelm our staff and our ability to provide the service. So I think Janet's probably going to talk about that a little bit. I don't want to steal her thunder, but we can move on to the next slide. Looking ahead, we're going to continue to revise and update our plans. I've said before that the emergency response plan is a living document. This is something that we change, especially when we have new events that we haven't experienced before. And as you might expect, the COVID response created some opportunities for us to manage things such as an extended activation. We provided some new checklists and resources for staff. And I think going forward, it will be helpful for us to do some projects that will encourage the coordination and the technical information that's needed to make good decisions. So on this slide, you see that the effort to modernize our warehouse and to implement the resource management systems, those have an emergency planning impact. And likewise, the Utility Service Center project will provide us an opportunity to improve our coordination during major events. And through my experience, I can certainly tell you that having the ability to ramp up or scale up during a major event is vital to our initial and early response and recovery efforts. So that's about all I have to talk about. I really wanted to allow some time for questions if you have any. We can move on. The last slide is just simply me thanking you for your time and your interest, and more importantly, for your support for our programs and our activities. So are there any questions?
Any questions from members of the board? Thank you. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Member Bala.
One quick one. So you referred to something big or major event. And I'm assuming these are earthquake, fire, and what else could be the nature of this event?
Well, you could have a pandemic. Strangely enough, we did some planning a number of years ago on the influenza, hoping to plan and prepare for an influenza, which was kind of a linear type event. The coronavirus is completely different, right? The signs and symptoms are harder to detect. It's a 12 to 14 day incubation period, so that changes things dramatically. And then there are other types of incidents which could be large scale civil unrest. You could have significant chemical spills. You know, we have some pipelines and railroads that come through Anaheim or in adjoining areas that could, you know, possibly, it's not very likely, but could create some significant challenges to us.
Got it. Thank you.
Any questions from the members of the board? Thank you.
Okay, thank
On
you.
the next item number 5, we have annual report for Department Order 310, extra work change orders.
Yes, so Janet and Michael are going to talk in a little bit more detail, but this is part of our department order that identifies how we can give you a summary of how we've done on change orders. So this includes projects that are administered through Public Works, in addition to other contracts that we have that are pre-qualified. And so, Michael, are you going to start off, or is Janet going to start off?
Janet's going to start off.
I'll start off, Dooku, and thank you and board members. Our DO 310, as Dooku said, it's a document, and it documents our procedures for change orders or even extra work for our projects. And as you'll see in the handouts, the actual report, there are a mix of projects, both electric and water. And it's also the Public Works administered projects tend to be the higher dollar projects. So for example, our substation projects, they range in the multi-million dollar range versus our master agreements and our professional service agreements, which are typically capped at $500,000 and $400,000 respectively. So this report includes all of those projects over the last fiscal year 1920 on both electric and water, projects that had a variance in the cost from what was approved from the original contract. So I'd like to just go over a couple of the electric ones, just to give an example. On page 2 of the report, you'll see construction projects for electric administered by Public Works. And 2 standouts to me are the Underground District number 464 Orangewood project. And as you can see, this was actually an underspend of the project. So what we try to do is we point out both overspend and underspend of change orders on the projects. In this particular case, some of the scope was taken out of the project, which included a paving and work that we do post our trenching, and we typically will do in conjunction with Public Works. So what will happen sometimes is we will include the cost of our paving portion of the project in our project bid. However, sometimes we will then combine it with a larger effort that Public Works has planned so that we can take advantage of efficiencies and the same contractor and those things. So we pull that scope out of our project, and then that scope is then included in a subsequent Public Works project. So that would be an example of why there's a negative 13% change in the project of that particular UD 64 project. Another example is our Harbor Substation project, which was a $27 million project. And of course, the net variance on it was very reasonable. It was a positive 3.8%. But as you can see, the change order amount was close to $900,000, which is a large amount for the city, even given the $27 million project cost. So in this case, we did go to council for that change order approval, and that change order was approved. And some of those had to do with site conditions, environmental conditions, some added work that we had to include for water quality treatment, and some work on foundation changes that had to be made to incorporate some of our standards. So things like that, it exceeded our authority to sign off on the change order. So we did take that to council and it was approved. Some of the smaller projects, the master construction agreements on page 4. Some of those, again, system undergrounding. Sometimes we work with our telecommunication partners, and some of the costs that they estimate it will take for them to do their work, we incorporate into our project, and then either on their end, their estimate was incorrect, or they also took out some scope. And so we have to adjust our project cost accordingly. So that happens on some of these things, as you can see in that system undergrounding project. I've highlighted pretty much the ones that exceeded plus or minus 10%, but if the board has any other questions on any of these projects, I'm happy to answer those, or I can also turn that over to Michael so he can speak to his water projects.
Yeah, there's really only one project I want to point out for the water, and that was on page 4, the Fern Haven and Crescent water main replacement project. And so that project, it had a negative 11%, and the same reason as Janet mentioned, we include the as a bid item, pavement and pavement restoration, the completion of the project in the contractor scope of work. And then what we do during construction or towards the end of construction is we talk to Public Works to see if they have other paving needs in that area. And if they do, then we offer them, we pull that line item away from the contractor and give that same budget over to Public Works to allow them with their own resources to do more paving and maybe some other street improvements that they desire to do. So it's kind of a win-win for the neighborhood. The whole neighborhood may get slurry sealed, whereas with our pipeline, maybe just the trench would have been repaved. So that's why that project was negative in this case.
So overall, you see that we had $75 million worth of contracted work, and we had 74.5 million in terms of total expenditures. So some are up, some are down, but it kind of levels out for the most part, is what you're seeing, at least in 1920.
Any questions from members of the board? No questions? We'll move on to updates for electric system issues. Ms. Honaker?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have a lot to talk about, and as you can imagine, as you heard before, we were talking about emergency planning. I wanted to update the board. I'll start with our outages during the heat storm. So we hit record temperatures on that Saturday and Sunday, September 5th and 6th. But equally tough on our system was record-breaking high evening temperatures. So when it comes to heat-related outages, typically what we'll see involved is burned out equipment. And that was consistent with what we saw. So the net result for that means we need more crews to make more repairs, even though fewer customers are impacted. So in this case, this weekend, or that weekend, I should say, we had 29 outages over a 3-day period, where we typically average 15 outages over an entire month. So as you can imagine, we were stressed to the edge there in terms of resources. We had 360 total customers impacted, which is not a high number. However, 24 customers were out of power for 24 hours, which is unusual. And we strive to not reach those that duration. In preparation for the heat wave, we did have crews stationed here at the yard for both days, Saturday and Sunday, but they couldn't keep up. So we had to call in all our crews and nearby contractors who were working on property on other jobs. We had them all come in, and we would fix 10 problems, and another 10 would pop up. So we got to the point where we couldn't even keep up with that. So that's when we called for mutual aid. And we called mutual aid from our neighboring utilities, Pasadena, Glendale, Riverside, but they were all having the same issues. So they couldn't afford to lose a crew to help us out. But we did get response from Burbank Water and Power, which we were very appreciative of. They were able to assist, and they sent over a large crew to help us finish out the repairs, so that by Tuesday morning, that would be the morning of the 8th, all repairs had been made. So some of the things, our lessons learned, or a little bit more about the outage, was the majority of the outages were our overhead CP type transformers. And you may have heard about us talk about CP transformers in our reliability report. And these were overhead transformers that are pole mounted, and they were used as early as the 1940s up to the early 2000s. And we have been systematically replacing these CP transformers. We still have 1,200 in the system, and we would typically replace 15% per year. But obviously, we have a bigger problem on our hands here. And so what we want to do is accelerate the replacement of both these CP transformers. And also that we did have some of the smaller residential underground transformers that are aging transformers as well. Some of those do get replaced when we're doing our DB cable replacement projects. We also replace those transformers, but we still do have some in the system, and we need to target those as well. So what we want to do is take what we had as a 10-year plan to do the replacement of these transformers and shrink it down to a 3 or 4-year plan to get through those 1,200 plus or minus CP transformers. Also, because we were stretched thin on our crews with mutual aid and all those call outs, what we would like to do is pursue purchasing some mobile generators. That would at least give us some time to prioritize the repairs that we need to make when we have multiple repairs to do, to target our crews at those prioritized areas, while we have generators to buy us some time and to have some customers' power restored in a more timely manner. So we will be looking at purchasing some of these smaller generators so that we can place them in strategic locations to pick up power so that we can lessen this duration of time that our customers out and lessen the impact to them. We also would like to look at having a mobile battery. And reasons for that, much like the generators, it's a good way to get power restored to customers in a small area so that we can reduce the duration of the outage. But also some of the issues we have with the generators is the noise level. So during the middle of the night, you have a generator that is going. It can be disruptive to some of the residents in the area. So what we would like to do is look at how we can have the same idea, but using a mobile battery that would be quiet and also flexible like our generators are. So our R&D folks are going to be doing some research in that area to see what's available and what we can utilize in those instances. Also, one of the things we considered but we didn't deploy was our customer care pop-ups, our neighborhood mobiles, where we go out to the neighborhoods to provide water, to provide cell phone charging, and also to have staff available to answer questions, because folks know it's a heat storm. They read it in the paper, they see it in the news all over. Edison had 390,000 customers out, LADWP 50,000. So they know what's going on generally, but they want to know what's going on particularly in their area and how our crews are responding and where our crews may be. So we considered deploying them. We didn't do it, and that was one thing that we need to lesson learned. We need to deploy those faster next time. As a follow-up to our mutual aid from Burbank, our Mayor Sadhu did send a letter to the Mayor of Burbank, Sharon Springer, in appreciation for their support to Anaheim. And again, taking advantage of our mutual aid partners really helped us get through what was really quite a heat storm and quite a storm for us as well. So I'm available to answer any questions the board might have. And we hope to, be better prepared next time as well.
So I wanted to add a couple things. Janet mentioned a transformer replacement program. So we're talking now about instituting that as part of our budgeting process. So some of you may be familiar that we have a direct buried cable program, because we have a lot of that old cable that was installed in the 60s and 70s, and we have a dedicated capital program to continually address and replace that old cable. And transformers, it wasn't quite as dedicated. It's not like we didn't do it, but I want something that's a much more rigorous program that looks at analytics. So the reason why Burbank was able to send a crew is because they have their automated metering fully deployed, and they've been able to do a little bit more in terms of proactive replacements over the last couple of years. So that's where we want to get to. We're not quite fully deployed. Our AMI is still going to be another 4 or 5 years before we get there, but we're going to start working on the software now so that as we get more and more, we'll be able to do more and better analytics and just be able to identify and target places for replacement. In the meantime, where we don't have that full deployment, we're going to be looking at obviously things like age, condition, vintage, transformers. How many customers are fed off that transformer? So one of the things is, there could have been a tract of homes or row of homes that was served by, let's say, 3 transformers, and each one served 8 or 9 homes, something like that. Well, with everybody adding things on, with all the air conditioning coming on at the same time, we're not going to be able to support that with the infrastructure that's there. So our engineers will need to look at, do we need to distribute and add more transformers as opposed to just replacing one? So those are the things that we're going to be looking at as part of this program. And Janet is already talking to her engineering staff about what this program is going to look like. And we're committed to provide you with the presentation after we have some of these things done. I think in the early part of next year is kind of what we've targeted. Is that right, Janet?
That's correct, Juku.
Yeah.
Any questions from members of the board?
I have a question. We keep talking about the automated meters, and you mentioned about 4 years before we actually roll that out. Is there any reason why we can't accelerate that?
A couple things. One is the resource. There's a capital component to it. The other is there's limited any type of deployment, right? It's not an instant turn on. We have limited staffing, limited resources, limited materials. And then as we deploy these things, what happens is our infrastructure, our communication network looks like a mesh system.
Mm-hmm.
And with any mesh, what do you see? You see little spots or holes or things where you have to add. So not only are we deploying meters, we're also enhancing our mesh network over time as well. So that full deployment process is going to take about 4 years or so in order to kind of fully build out. Yeah. So yes, I wish we could do it more instantaneously, but just in terms of the inertia to get through all 100,000 meters. It's quite a large number. So that's what our engineers feel like they can work with our meter folks in order to deploy. What we are doing is any type of new development, they're automatically installed with advanced meters. All of our medium and large commercial, they're all already, and that's 75% of our revenue right there. So it's really just residential that we don't have this for.
Member Beraldi?
Yeah, I got a few questions. So number one, talking about transformers, and I know a lot of them are old. What is the lifespan? And then what's the average age of our transformers we have out there? Is this something, I mean, obviously I know they go out. I mean, they have a lifespan. So where do we stand with that, out of curiosity?
Yeah, so a typical transformer, it can last about 40 years. We depreciate at 30, but generally speaking, 40 years is a pretty good life of a transformer. We have some that are a little bit older than that, but we'll work on, when we do the transformer replacement presentation, we'll include the average age of the fleet for you, Mr. Beraldi.
Yeah. Okay, second question, mobile generators. Didn't we discuss last year? I remember having a discussion about mobile generators, but I think they were larger. So we're talking to like what size generators, and what was this what we discussed last year when we had this issue?
No, last year when we got the procurement for a large mobile transformer, that's the substation transformer. So that's the multi-million-dollar one that you can take from a substation to another substation. What Janet's talking about
I remember
now,
that. We talked about a smaller one that was related to like an outage we had at an apartment complex.
Yeah, that
And we
was,
talked about
sorry, Mr. Baroli, yes, that was actually the smaller generators now. Those are the portable generators that we can actually put in the truck and deploy to a single location, whether it's a commercial, industrial business. And that's to really just get their basic functions back up. So in that case, it was to get some of their phone systems up and some of their computer systems up, and how can we assist to at least get them to where they can do some business when we know it's going to be a large outage. So the transformers we're talking about in this case are larger than that. Not as large as our mobile substation transformer, but they're in the mid-range. They could range about 500 kilowatts, and they could 100 to 500 kilowatt, and they have the ability to have multiple taps, so it can serve multiple voltages. So we're trying to get a generator as flexible as possible so that we can use it in a variety of applications, and that it's actually mobile enough that we can pull it from one of our trucks. And so this can serve, maybe 10, maybe 20 residences at a time. We can string the wires along the same poles while our crews are fixing the transformers, replacing the transformers that have been damaged, and to give us a holdover for some of the customers while we prioritize our work.
Yeah. Okay. So this is more like you're saying that instead of being something that would service one facility, this would be something that's servicing where one transformer has blown. So maybe what does that serve? Like 20 homes? Something?
Yeah, it could serve 5, 10, 15 homes, just depending on the locations, the size of the transformer. So it could be, like I said, that would be, for example, that's 100 kW transformer that could potentially be serving 20 residences. And so that's what we're looking for, is how can we maximize the flexibility of this generator to either serve 20 or so residential customers, or take that same generator to a larger facility like a commercial facility. And in that case, it would be large enough to maybe support that facility more than just their basic needs.
And just out of curiosity, we heard that, generator versus mobile battery, which Duku, I think you mentioned. So what's the difference in cost on those? I mean, one's conventional, probably inexpensive compared to mobile battery, or am I off base? Obviously, one lasts a lot. Just put more diesel on it.
The mobile battery is going to be significantly more expensive. What we're checking on right now is to see if we could use the low carbon fuel standard funding source, which is what we use for electric transportation. And that might help cover that cost. Otherwise, just on a kilowatt per kilowatt basis, it is more expensive to roll out a battery type system. The other thing I'd like to point out is while generators sound good, they take resources to install. And what we don't want to do is flood all of these generators out there and have everybody trying to hook them up and nobody's fixing the outage. So it's a balancing act. So we're trying to give ourselves some tools, but at the same point, we don't want to tell a customer, hey, it's going to take us 3 hours to install this generator, but it's going to take us, another 2 hours after that, 5 hours after that, whatever it happens to be. So again, we're learning as we go. We're trying to make improvements. We're saying that some generators will help, but it's not going to be where we blanket the city with a whole bunch of generators.
No, I get that, of course. And the last thing, so all of these power surges was obviously during, or these incidents occurred during this heat wave. I'd just like to reiterate how lucky we got that it was when we were in COVID. We didn't have a lot of power users weren't using the power they would normally use, or am I off base there?
So this is actually the same question that Mr. Seymour asked as well. And you're really having to look at it on a circuit by circuit basis. If you're looking at our entire system, we had more than enough power to serve our entire, because we have the reserve level on our resources. So power was not the issue. What the issue is on a circuit by circuit level, what is the load? And obviously on some circuits, you're going to have higher industrial commercial loads. On other circuits, you're going to have higher residential loads. And so it really kind of depends on what's going down. And then the issue with us was that individual transformers were going and that needed to be replaced. And each one of those takes 3, 4, 5 hours depending on where it's physically located. So on a system-wide level, were we in trouble? No, Graham has always had sufficient reserves to cover our peak need. And we got somewhat close, but we didn't get near our all-time peak of 593 megawatts from 2006. So I think we would have been okay on that front if restaurants and resort and hotels, et cetera, were operational. It's if all of those were overloading at the same time that residential transformers were overloading. If that were to happen, then yes, it would have been a much more significant issue because again, each transformer replacement takes so much time. And that's why the replacement program that we're trying to design is going to help us identify those that are operating closer to the fringe and give us a chance to replace it more proactively rather than waiting for the next heat storm.
Excellent. Thank you, Duca.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Next
Okay.
item. Oh,
I just have
Janet.
a couple more follow-ups as well. If you remember our last board meeting, we had a public comment requesting our pull box to be readjusted because a customer had done some paving work in their driveway. And I just wanted to report to the board that the adjustment has been made and we've circled back with the customer and they were satisfied with the service we provided and that the pull box is no longer a tripping hazard and flush with their new driveway. So that has been completed and I just wanted to let the board know. And lastly, I'd like to share with you a letter that was sent from the Orange County Business Council, and it's addressed to our Transmission and Distribution Engineering Manager, Fred Barvars. I believe you have a copy in front of you, and it's an appreciation for Fred for serving on the OCBC's 5G wireless panel at their 2020 Economic Development Forum that was on August the 4th. So Fred manages the fiber and telecommunication division for the utility, and he's really our subject matter expert on developing standards and the requirements for the wireless carriers to deploy their 5G cell sites throughout the city on the streetlight poles. So Fred has accumulated considerable knowledge of best practices on the 5G deployment on our street lighting infrastructure. And he shares that information with other public agencies that are not as in advanced stages as Anaheim is, and the lessons we've learned from those deployments. And he shares that with these other public agencies. So in this case, he represents the utility as a leader in this area, and I wanted to recognize this in front of the board and share this letter with our board members.
Great.
Thank you.
That's all I have for electric.
Okay, no questions. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on water system issues. Mr. Moore?
Yeah, you guys have the water supply dashboard in front of you and on the screen. And up at the top are the storage accounts that we utilize here in Anaheim. So in the upper left is the groundwater basin, Orange County groundwater basin storage account, and that's the usable level of the portion of the account that we utilize. As you can see, it is continuing to increase. And for those of you that have been here for more than 3 years on the board, you may recall seeing that near the bottom just a few years ago. So big increases in storage water, the storage water that we have available in our groundwater basin, and which will put us in really good condition when we get our wells back online and if we enter into a new drought, because that groundwater basin will allow us to get through at least 2, maybe 3 years of a very serious drought outside of our region. So that's good news. On the other 2 storage accounts, which are our imported water storage accounts, the conditions in California and the Colorado Basin were very dry this year, so at the very end of the summer. And as you can see, primarily the lower Colorado River storage levels are still higher than what they were a year ago. And so that's really good news, that levels are increasing in Lake Mead. Again, that's a storage account that we'll be able to utilize through Metropolitan Water District if we enter into a new drought. And Diamond Valley Lake, where they store water locally here in Southern California, is also at very high levels also. So all of the storage levels coming out of this very dry year are at very high levels. And that's largely because demands have been down for the last couple of years throughout Southern California and Anaheim. However, the past few weeks with the heat here this month in Southern California, we've seen significantly higher demands the past few weeks than we have any other time this year. So we'll look forward to that, see how that affects those storage accounts. Any questions on the water supply condition update?
Questions?
One other thing, if I just want to update, is we got to enter into fire season here. We are getting ready for it, and we are testing and exercising all of our fire hydrants, particularly in the along the wildfire corridor and interface areas. So we're out there. We've tested all the fire hydrants, completed that, fixed the ones that were broken, the valves that were broken in that area, and they all seem to be working as of now. And as you know, there are wildfires all throughout the state, and even the ones here in Southern California that aren't right up next to Anaheim, we are seeing some impact to our water system. The ash that has been in the smoky conditions that we've had here earlier this month have affected the water quality that we've seen coming in. The ash has settled in and dissolved, and has changed the condition of the water and the pH of the water. So we are making adjustments at our water treatment plant to ensure that the water coming out of that treatment plant is just as pure and clean as the water is any other time of the year. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing no questions, move on to finance issues.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 items for you this evening. The first, I want to turn your attention to our dashboard on the electric portion of the dashboard. As you can probably imagine, during the heat storm, we did generate significantly more revenue than we originally anticipated through our budget, but that revenue actually came from our wholesale sales, not yet from our retail sales. We will probably see that revenue generated in the next month or 2 as the billings continue to trickle into our customers. But as you can see on that dashboard, our revenue for August was about $2.7 million above budget. We were $5 million above budget from wholesale sales. So because of the heat storm, Graham's group was able to sell a significant amount of power to the larger CalISO market, which is good news for our Anaheim customers. And as you can see, our expenditures came in a little bit below budget. So even though the COVID restrictions are still in place, the resort is still largely shut down, our budget still remains in pretty good standing considering everything that we're currently experiencing. On the water side, I'll just briefly touch on the water side. Sales are slightly below budget, but all costs are slightly below budget as well. So from a budgetary standpoint, we have no real concerns on the water side. I do want to report to the board that Standard & Poor's has recently reviewed our credit rating and came in with a AA-. So they affirmed our current credit rating, which something that was interesting this time around that I've never seen before in my career is they originally were going to rate us A+, which is a downgrade from AA-, based on the concerns with the COVID restrictions and the impacts that has on our revenue stream, especially from the resort area. What bumped us back to AA- was what they called a one-notch holistic upgrade based on the strong management team. And what they really commented on is the consistency and longevity of the management team and the staff that we currently have here in Anaheim. So it's a tip of the hat to everybody that's sitting in that room there and throughout our organization, that they do recognize that we do have a team that has been here a while, that's been through the wars and has been able to respond adequately to their concerns. So I did just want to report that to the board, that this is something, again, that's not typical in for ratings, that they would give us a notch upgrade based on what they see in the management team. So again, that's good news for Anaheim. And with that, I'll be ready to answer any questions from the board.
Vice Chair Seymour.
I just want to offer my congratulations to the management team. That is a significant accomplishment and achievement, and well deserved.
Yeah, and you know, Brian's being very modest, but he does a great job of interfacing not only with the credit rating agencies, but with the financial community, as you well know, in order to get refinancings done. We're going to be talking about a line of credit here in the near future and other tools to give us maximum flexibility to be able to do the things that we're talking to you about, replacing equipment and those types of things. So he really does a great job, him and his entire staff, on managing our financial portfolio, just like all the other portfolios we have to manage here, and then the risks associated with it. And yes, we do have to raise rates, but we try to make it as incremental and as minimal as possible, so we can still always try to keep more money in our customers' pockets. But it's always a balancing act. You know, we still got to pay our expenses and things, but Brian does a fantastic job of managing all of those financial assets that we have.
Fantastic job. Great job, everyone. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Any other questions? No questions? All right.
I do have a questions. This
Yes.
is Eddie. One of my neighbor asked me last time, he told me there is a lawsuit against the department for diverting, like fund from whatever to something else. If that's, just want to know the background of it, if that exists.
Yeah, so let me give you just a real high snapshot, and Allison, please help me if I overstep. But the city was sued on a general fund transfer between the utility and the balance of the city. And so there's a class certification process where we must notify residents and customers who are affected. And so there was a postcard mailing that went out, which we talked about very briefly at our last board meeting. So a very good chance that your neighbor received one of those postcards and was commenting on that. So I think that was probably the situation, AB. Does that sound like it's the situation, a postcard received?
Yes, I think that's, yeah, could be that the one, yes. Because he can stop me and ask me.
One of those two.
Yes, yes, so everybody should have received one. Like I said, it's ongoing litigation, so that's why we haven't really discussed it here in the board. But you are always welcome to contact Allison directly if you have more detailed questions where you try to get a little bit more context on what exactly it means. Then please feel free. Peggy can always help coordinate a phone call with Allison directly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to an update on power supply issues. Mr. Bowen.
Okay, so let's start with the power supply dashboard, and let's talk about August 1st, and we can talk about September and what happened there and kind of dissect that a little bit more. But From a generation standpoint, as I said last time when we met, the July and August have been really good months, August especially. You can see anytime we're pushing up against our load forecast for that month, that blue bar is really tall. It means we're doing pretty good with generation and less outages. And that can be seen when you look at the unit outages. The only outages we experienced in August was for Canyon 1 and a Canyon 4 unit. And as I said before, Canyon 4, we expect to be, it's still operating. It's got some vibration issues, but not an oil leak, but we're able to still operate it at this point in time and expect to take that out closer to mid-October when the weather cools down and send that out for repairs and have that back in a few weeks. So good news on the outage front from that perspective. Renewable generation as well, a little bit below forecast, but overall did pretty well. Wind coming in the evenings, I think more so than anything else to really help us. And conventional generation, of course, I think here's where Canyon really saved the day. And Brian talked about the fact that wholesale sales were really high. Canyon took the lion's share of those wholesale sales for us, followed by IPP. So, really strong performance from the Canyon units over the outage, the forecasted period where we had the heat storm. So good news there. And as of course, because of that, what do? We produce more energy, those sales really do shoot up. With regards to market purchases, even though we've got generation, we still purchase energy when it's more economical to do so. And we've done that. We did that over several hours in the evenings, for most evenings through the August month. So overall, didn't produce or didn't buy a lot of energy, but bought enough, just a little bit above what we expected to buy by about 6 gigawatt hours. When you talk about wholesale sales as well, if you look at prices down the bottom there, you can see that the ISO prices for this August was about 2.5 times higher than we expected. And the last time we saw these kinds of prices was when we had the outage for, I believe, Aliso Canyon back in 2015, and also in 2017-18 timeframe when we had SoCal Gas do a lot of outages on their gas lines, and we saw prices spike because of that. So this again is what we're seeing, price spikes because of the fact that there's a lot of energy needed and there's not much out there. Turning to the second page, portfolio has really stayed steady for the most part. We produced about the same as we produced for renewables over the past couple of months. That hasn't changed. With the coal generation, we've increased a little bit because of the need for producing that power to help supply the ISO's load during those hot periods of time. So that's the one increase we do see. And as I said to you last month, the average cost of our resources are going up. As you see, CAISO prices have doubled since the last month, and we expect to see, because of September, again, that price start to spike up again because of the warmer period there. Okay, so that's with the whole kind of setup for August. Are there any questions with regards to the August portfolio and the dashboard itself and how we did? Okay, great. So let's go back in and talk about the, I think what everybody wants to know about, which is the September heat wave, right? So preparedness went much smoother in September than I think we saw in August. That's clearly what we saw. We went into a stage 2 on September 6th at about 6 p.m. and it's on a Sunday. And we stayed in a stage 2 till about 8:30 p.m. that night. Remarkably, no stage 3 was cold, especially when you consider the gap in energy that we had in the early hours of what they expected in the early evening hours for that period of time. And to give you some perspective of this, the ISO is forecasting a gap of 4,500 megawatts between hour 6 and 7 p.m. on that Sunday night. That's the equivalent to about 5 of Anaheim, city of Anaheim loads throughout the state of California. There's quite a lot of energy they had to make up. But I think thankfully conservation was one of them, a lot of conservation. Power purchasing from Navy utilities as well helped, like LADWP, and also some of the neighboring states stepped in to help us with that as well. So temperatures were really, really hot. I think we set several records within the state and probably some within Anaheim. It's just, simply put, it was a scorcher, I think. There's no way to get around that. We did have one of our gas units, our Magnolia unit, which was operating during the heat storm. It did trip. It tripped on that Saturday evening when it wasn't too hot. We were getting ready for that really warm Sunday and that Monday. It tripped. What happened was a gas valve, which supplies fuel to the fuel valve, which allows the gas unit to operate, slammed shut because it lost power. So it failed essentially. It fails in a closed position to prevent more gas from going into the unit. So it took about 12 hours to troubleshoot that from the time the unit went down. So crews were working through the night in Burbank to help get Magnolia back online. And we actually got it back online at about 6 a.m. in the morning on Sunday, just in time for that Sunday ramp up and the hot operations that we saw that day. We lost about a total of 26 operating hours over the course of that 2-day period. But altogether, all of our units performed well with no other issues. I would say that, in terms of coordination, when you look at the August event with the CAISO, I think we produced and did a lot better because we were ready for it. I think it's simply the rarity of these kinds of events that have happened in the last few years that really point to why we did better in September than we did in August. I think we were just better prepared after the first little upset we saw. So prices did spike, obviously, in these periods of time. And typically our prices that we see in the ISO market are about $100 a megawatt hour. And we were seeing prices upwards of $1,000 a megawatt hour. So that's 10 times the market pricing that we were seeing during that period of time. So again, simply a function of supply and demand, but overall, I think the investigations that are going to be taking place in the next 3 to 6 months, I hope, and I suspect that nothing untoward will be found. I think it was really a function of the market and the fact that there was so little power out there when we had such high loads coming in. That's about it for September and what happened. If there are any takeaways, other than the ones we've learned over the last month or so, I will certainly bring that to you in the next few months once we get reports back from the ISO and the state and the feds as to exactly what the impacts were of those particular outages and the heat storm itself. So with that, I'll answer any questions you might have with regards to the September outage as well.
Yeah, so I just have a quick comment I wanted to make is I got an email from a former board chair, Mr. Lon Cahill, if you know him, and his comment was, boy, wasn't it great that we installed Canyon?
Oh, yes.
My goodness, right? And that thing was operating like a champ. There's some issues that Graham's mentioned before that we're gonna have to fix, but my goodness, 200 megawatts, supporting the city, supporting the larger grid. It just worked like a champ. So we're very pleased. The generator technicians, the generator manager, they all were very diligent about operating as we were dispatched and did just a phenomenal job. So kudos to Graham's team for making sure that we're operating at our optimal.
Let me just say one more thing, Dooku. I can tell you that during that 2-3 day period, I've never had so many texts and emails going back and forth ever in the history of me being at this city. So we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of emails and texts going back and forth to make sure that we try to keep the power up and running with these units and monitoring what was going on in the ISO. So I think it was a great effort all around. We've got things we've learned from it. We're taking those things away and coming back stronger next time. So anyway.
Mr. Seymour.
Yeah, just a comment. I think, and I've always thought that having a canyon is a true asset to our utility. Because it gives us all kinds of different options in all different kinds of ways. And one of my concerns is that we move toward green power and we don't have canyon. What is our strategy to replace that level of flexibility and as an asset that we have? It's a long ways off.
Yes.
It's going to require some thought.
But it's something that we've been thinking about a lot recently. I think if you ask the state, what is the goal? The goal is fossil fuel goes away, batteries take their place. I think that's a simple way. I think from our perspective, what we've learned over the recent heat waves is that having that 10-minute dispatch capability from Canyon, providing 200 kilowatts consistently is huge. And so what we will do is we'll do our best to explain to regulators and legislators that peaking plants like this are different than the baseload units that are operating all the time, the coastal units and some of the other ones that are older and less efficient. And hopefully that gives us a little bit more reprieve. Not only that, we still got debt on Canyon. So the debt's gonna keep us in that project for a period of time anyway. So I think the argument we'd like to make is it provides tremendous flexibility. It's not operating all the time, it's really there for emergency and high load periods of time. And we'll see if we can generate some momentum along those lines.
I think that's a great idea. Because it is essential.
It is, even with batteries, right?
You
Even,
can't get there with batteries.
even if
like
you
what
have-
you have with can.
exactly, but even if you had a whole bunch of batteries, they could start to fail too, right? So you never know. So I think having this, it doesn't hurt anything.
You can
It's
run Canyon 24 hours a day.
right.
You can run your batteries. 4 hours.
Somebody had good vision.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions for members of the board?
Good job, John.
Go ahead.
Thank
Good
you.
job. Agree with everything you said, sir.
I just have a comment. Unfortunately, I and some of our neighbors were actually directly impacted by a transformer, underground transformer failure. And on the hottest day in that heat wave, from about 5 o'clock, we had no power. It was like 104 degrees at 8 o'clock. And my mom was home. We had left already to go someplace. But I just want to thank everybody in the utility, people who were there till 1 a.m. And Duke was sending texts on almost a regular basis to me till 2 a.m. in the morning. So I just have a absolute newfound appreciation for what the team does. There were trucks and those guys were just relentlessly doing it, and they did not leave there till the time we had power restored. So I really want to thank everybody for that.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate your patience. And we know, just like you and your neighbors and everybody else, it stinks to have no power for an extended period of time when it's hot. And we totally understand that. Our staff understands that. We tell them, do it safely, but try to do it as quickly as you can. And that's why we decided, Janet and I decided early on, it's like, we're gonna call for mutual aid because this is not gonna get any better. And so once we started to see things kind of continuing on, she mentioned, you fix something else breaks. That's when we started making calls. And so her staff really did a fantastic job of trying to make sure and manage all of those things. So there's a lot of people working long hours that weekend. Yeah, but thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a comment. Just a comment. You guys do a great job. But I want to point out that all that heat happened during the COVID restrictions. And, in the old days, if you didn't have air conditioning, you would go to the mall or you would go to the movie theater and you'd go watch a movie in the heat of the day. And no one had that option because the malls were closed. I mean, I guess you could have gone to Walmart, but you know what I'm saying? The malls were closed, the theaters were closed, some of the places that people could go to get, to duck out some of the heat. So I think our team did a great job, considering that everybody was probably mostly at home during all that heat wave and had to put up with all that. So I'm fortunate our power didn't go out at all because we have a new transformer. So
I will say this.
thank you,
I will say-
Janet.
Yes. So Julie, you bring up a great point, but I will say that our customers, by and large, were so understanding. I can't mention my sincere appreciation. People understood that we were hustling and doing the best we could, that they were going to be out. We were communicating with them. I had my operations manager constantly on Anaheim Anytime, giving updates to people. And people were really, really very understanding. So Anaheim customers, I think they get it, that we're not staffed for the peak. We're staffed for nominal service. So as a result, when things go bad, they're very patient. We had one Anaheim Anytime comment that came in and said, I had an 8.5-hour outage. And the responses were, excellent, great, thank you. And I'm like, well, that's not something you see every day. And the response back said, I saw you guys out there hustling, really appreciate it. I understand it was a trying situation. Thank you very much.
The
And
reason they are understanding is because we have very high reliability all the time.
Yeah.
If we didn't, they would not be understanding.
absolutely, agreed, absolutely. So, okay. Was there anything else, Graham?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next item, we will go on to update on enterprise risk and compliance. Ms. Lehman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I do have a couple of updates for the Enterprise Risk and Compliance Division. Everything is going well. We had some big news today. The governor issued an executive order requiring by 2035 that all in-state passenger cars and light vehicles be zero emission. It could be EV, it could be hydrogen, but it is looking like, you know, he's trying to push the electric vehicles. By 2045, he'd like to see all medium and heavy duty vehicles, where feasible, be zero emission as well. This is expected to cut greenhouse gas emissions overall by about 35%, and the nitrogen oxide emissions by 80%. And it will significantly increase the adoption of EV technology and accelerate the shift to electricity as a transportation fuel, which will be pretty good news for the electric utility. It looks like the governor is planning to do all of this through regulation at the Air Resources Board and not through the legislative process. So that's going to be interesting. And then speaking about the legislative process, all bills have passed out of their House of Origin, and if they are positioned to pass, they are on the governor's desk. We do have two previous bills that we've discussed in regard to water that are on the governor's desk that we're hoping pass. And one of them is AB 2560 by Quirk, and that's that bill that would prevent a PFOS situation from happening again. It would put a regulatory process when you're setting an advisory level, and it would at least indicate to the water industry new regulations are coming our way, and gives us some time to make sure that they're scientifically based and to prepare and plan for them. The other one is SB 1386, the Morlock bill, that would help us with our fire hydrant lawsuits. I think there's 80 lawsuits throughout the state that are challenging if fire hydrants should be part of the water bill and our water invoice. And this bill would affirm that, yes, that is indeed the correct way to charge for those costs. As well, there's several COVID-related bills. Two in particular have passed. They're now new laws. One of them gives an employer a rebuttable presumption that the employee contracted COVID on the job. And then the other one, AB 685, it puts in place reporting requirements. That one doesn't go into effect until the first of the year, but it's something we're working on now anyway, where if there were a COVID exposure, we would inform our employees that risk occurred and there was a potential exposure. In October, we'll have a legislative wrap-up report for you. It's probably going to be the smallest ever, just because the focus of this legislative session was not on utilities, but really was on kind of COVID and more economic-related aspects this year. One other item I have, in October, it's National Drug Take Back Day. I'm kind of advertising this early, and I think Peggy's got a slide on that for us. This is kind of an important experience or opportunity, I should say, for Anaheim. And what this does, it provides a place, it actually happens twice a year. It's going to start happening twice a year, in April and in October, where people can take any unused medications, drop them off at all Walgreens, or on October 24th from 10 to 2 p.m. at the large Kaiser facility at La Palma. And what this does, it helps spread the word, and it helps keep people from flushing these types of medications or throwing them into the landfill, which eventually ends up in our water supply. And so, we kind of look at it, and we are always looking out at what are some of the emerging contaminants, and prescription drugs are one that could be something we see in the future. So this is something we wanted to make you all aware of. And if you wanted to help us spread the word on this, it will be on our website, or is on our website now, for people to understand where they can take any type of prescription drugs that that they don't have a need for, and dispose of those properly. And that really does help the environment. And it's also a public safety issue, not having drugs around that you're not using. And that's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Janice, if I were to take these drugs, I mean, typically the bottles have my personal name, information, medical record number, et cetera, et cetera. So how's that handled? Is this a privacy issue?
Not at all. You could just put them into a Ziploc baggie and bring those in. They don't have to be in the containers.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time on the agenda, we're item by secretary.
Okay, we have a couple items planned for next month. One is a line of credit, and so Brian will be introducing this item. It's $100 million that gives us tremendous flexibility, and so we've worked really hard on this one. So I hope we're presenting that item for your consideration. The next one is Graham is working on a participating generator agreement. We have our IPP coal unit, and we want it to be a little bit easier to enter into the CAISO market. And so this generator agreement will help us give us that additional ease of incorporating that resource. So those are two items for your consideration next month. I wanted to report to the board that the city has implemented an internet rebate program for income qualified customers. And the city manager's office asked the utility to help administer that. And the reason why is the utility, one, we do have working relationships with the telecommunication companies because of undergrounding and such, 5G, et cetera. And the other reason is because we do rebate programs. So because of those reasons, the city manager's office felt that we should be able to implement something like this without huge staffing issues or things like that, which we can. So it got approved on September 15th. And just for your reference, it provides up to $120 for income qualified residents. And what we did was we made them, one of the provisions is you have to be on one of our discounts because our discount is income qualified. So one, they could save money if they're not already, they should be on their utility bill. And then secondly, they could get a rebate on their telecom bill. So it's a win-win, I think, for us to be able to administer this and get hopefully more participants into our utility rebate programs, as well as customers getting broadband access for those who are telecommuting, kids who are at home, having issues and such. This gives them a little bit more flexibility. So just to be clear, the money for the rebates is not utility money. The money for the rebates is coming from the CARES Act. So it's federal stimulus money that came through the state and the county and is just administered by us. Last thing I have is I wanted to share with the board a project that was recently done. And this was some street lighting on Cyprus. So Cyprus is just around the corner here, just near George Washington Park. So it's really a stone's throw from City Hall. And we have, the next slide shows you what the street looks like. So this has the historic style street lighting that's in the downtown area that you may have seen. And so this is just a Google image of Cypress Street. So let's move on to the next slide. And so this is what that area looks like at night. And so there was a customer who wrote into our council member from District 3, Councilmember Moreno. He said, we are longtime Anaheim residents and have lived in Anaheim District 3 since 2011. Our home located on Cypress Street is relatively dark with older amber-colored street lighting. This seems to give thieves a sense of security to see mailboxes that are posted on each curb of each home, which is easy access for any drive-by mail theft. So what we do in these situations where either a resident comments to our code enforcement, police, community services, council members, board members, whoever it is, we take all of those seriously. And it's because it's a quality of life issue. And so for somebody who's living in this area and not feeling comfortable, if there's something we can do to introduce lighting to help them, we try to do that. So the next slide shows, this is our troubleshooter. So this is not a picture we took. This is actually a picture that Ben took of our troubleshooter replacing that. And because it's the historic one, our engineers, it took a little time to find a good replacement with the LED system that fits in and matches the style of this. The next slide shows you a picture of what it looks like with the improvements there. And it makes a big difference, right? You still have some shading from the trees. And so we work with Public Works to do a little bit of trimming. And then the next slide shows you the response and says, we can't believe the improved lighting enhancement request was completed in under a week. It was done so fast last Thursday that I didn't get a chance to take the before pictures. We haven't talked to all our neighbors, but so far there is positive feedback after the lighting improvements on Cyprus. So one of the things that we try to do with lighting improvements in neighborhoods where there could be sensitivity is we try to do a little bit and get some reaction as opposed to blanketing. When you blanket and people don't like it, it's really hard to go back. So if you start doing it kind of sequentially and then expand a little at a time, then it gives people a chance to acclimate visually, and then also from a mindset of this is kind of the new normal. And then, so we've actually now looking to expand this beyond Cypress Street. Then we got a voicemail forwarded to us from another resident to our community services. So we didn't receive this directly. And it says, this message is from Edith. I wanted to give you feedback on the lights from the street lights that were recently installed. They're phenomenal. They provide literally a peace of mind to my home, my kids, when we drive late. Everything is lit properly. It's amazing, and I'm so happy. This is probably one of the best things that could have happened in our neighborhood. It's an amazing improvement to our street. We love it. We're so happy to have such a lit street. You know, any time of the night, we can feel secure. Our home is secure. It's amazing. So like I said, it's a quality of life issue for a lot of people, even though it's just lighting. And so we do take these very seriously. And so for our Janet's group to go out there and make the repairs and replacements as quickly as they do, and then give people a chance to get acclimated. And once we see that it's positively received, then we start to expand over time. So just wanted to give credit to Janet and her team for really making a concerted effort to replace the lighting as they are well received and working with the residents and such. And that's all I have, sir.
Great. More questions? We'll move on to items by board members. Member Gaona, any items?
I just pretty much just wanted to say great job to all the team and administration team and even staff and the ground pounders out there. Amazing. I'm very proud and honored to be part of this crew. Pretty much that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Showalter.
Just a little kudos to Fred for his recognition for his work helping the other utilities in the area and just passing along his knowledge. Janet, you should be proud of Fred.
I am.
Thank you. Member Brody?
Nothing from me.
Thank you. Member Abdul Rahman?
Yeah, I guess I want to also to echo that it's a good job and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Member Bala?
Nothing from me.
And Vice Chair Seymour?
I just wanted to comment, I have been watching the undergrounding going on Royal Oak and Anaheim Hills. It's a major project. The contractors have done a very good job of keeping at least half the street open. So there's always access that you can get through, which is always a concern if there is an urgent issue that you had to have a way out, because it's only one of two for a large area. They've done a very good job of that. The other impression I have is it is one complex piece of project engineering and management.
Oh, yes.
There are so many steps that are involved in this. And I would just encourage all board members to get familiar with how complex that is and what it actually takes to get this done.
Yeah.
So good job.
Thank you very much. You bring up a good point. That's why these projects take as long as they do. They take somewhere in the 3-year range in many cases.
And why they cost so much.
Right, because exactly what you said, they're very complicated. We don't think what 1 foot of wire does, but it may light a traffic signal, a street light, a home, and then when you add thousands and thousands of feet together, yes, it is very complicated. So thank you very much, appreciate that.
And board member Seymour, would you mind if I gave you just an update on that we're about 40% completed on the construction that's on Royal Oak and Sarah Vista, and then we're planning to start excavating on Crescent in late October. So more
Very
to
good.
come on that.
I can't wait till you take those poles down.
I'm sure the people who live on Royal Oak feel the exact same as you.
I just have to watch how they do it. I mean, it's amazing.
Thank you. And from my side, I make great work for the crews out there that have kept us, kept the power going, you know, and thank you, Burbank.
Yeah.
We don't realize, but it's good to have that kind of collaboration throughout the region. But again, I mean, just please thank the folks that they're out there working in that heat, putting in the time and the hours to make sure that we're all taken care of, because I mean, we could imagine just hearing the anecdote of being out of power for over triple digits. It's got to be tough for folks. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback.
And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by
Second.
Mr. Seymour, second by Member Bala.
Sure.
Is it Member Bala? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Wrong one. And we'll take a roll call vote.
This is a roll call vote for item number 13. Vice Chair Seymour,
Aye.
Board Member Abdul Rahman,
Aye.
Board Member Baroldi.
Aye.
Board Member Bala,
Aye.
Board Member Guyona,
Aye.
Board Member Showalter,
Aye.
Chairman Dono.
Aye.
The vote is 7 ayes, 0 nays, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So what would happen if we didn't vote to
Good night. Hi, everyone. Have a good one.